Hello and welcome to the Minimum Competence episode for Monday, August 17th, 2026. I'm your host for today, Andrew Leahy, an assistant teaching professor of law at Drexel Klein School of Law. On today's episode, the Tupac Shakur murder trial opens in Las Vegas. Attorney General Blanche breaks with the president to back a prosecutor Trump criticized, and a judge lets the administration end temporary protected status for over 1,000 Somalis. Let's remember, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. And read today's legal news. On this day in legal history, August 17th, 1998, President Bill Clinton became the first sitting president to testify before a grand jury as the subject of its investigation. He gave his testimony via closed-circuit television from the White House to Independent Counsel Kenneth Starr's grand jury concerning his relationship with a White House intern, and that same evening, he addressed the nation to admit he had misled the public about it. The legal machinery that brought a president to that moment is worth understanding. It began improbably with a civil lawsuit, Paula Jones' sexual harassment suit, which produced the 1997 Supreme Court decision Clinton v. Jones, holding that a sitting president is not immune from civil litigation over unofficial conduct and can be deposed while in office. That deposition and the questions in it are what put Clinton's statements under oath, and when those statements collided with what Starr's investigation uncovered, the independent counsel built a case around perjury and obstruction of justice. Clinton carefully insisted his earlier answers had been legally accurate, a phrase that became emblematic of the entire episode. The significance of August 17, 1998 is layered. It led directly to Clinton's impeachment by the House on charges of perjury and obstruction, only the second presidential impeachment in American history, and his acquittal by the Senate. But its deeper legal legacies are the ones that still echo. Clinton v. Jones established that the presidency is not a shield against civil accountability for private conduct, a principle you can hear resonating in today's fights over presidential immunity, and the whole saga became a national seminar on perjury, executive privilege, and the limits of the independent counsel model, which Congress let expire the following year. It's a fitting anniversary for a day when the relationship between political power and prosecutorial judgment is, once again, at the center of the news. Opening statements began today in Las Vegas in the murder trial of Dwayne Keffe D. Davis, nearly 30 years after the 1996 killing of rapper Tupac Shakur. Davis, 63, is charged with murder with a deadly weapon with intent to promote a criminal gang. He has pleaded not guilty and faces life in prison if convicted. A 16-person jury has been selected, and prosecutors are expected to call roughly 40 witnesses. The witness list includes Suge Knight, who was driving the car in which Shakur was shot, and Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, who responded to the shooting as a Las Vegas police sergeant in 1996. Prosecutors say Davis was the shot caller behind a quickly assembled plan to retaliate after Shakur and members of his entourage beat Davis's nephew at the MGM Grand earlier that evening. The government's theory places the killing within a larger conflict involving rival street gangs. The obvious problem for prosecutors is time. Trying a murder case 3 decades after the crime means dealing with faded memories, unavailable witnesses, and physical evidence that may have been lost or degraded. What eventually revived the case, however, was Davis himself. Over the years, Davis publicly discussed his involvement in Shakur's killing in interviews and in a memoir. Those statements now form an important part of the prosecution's case. They also give the defense an obvious line of attack. Statements made years later for publicity, money, or street credibility are not necessarily reliable accounts of what actually happened. That makes Davis's own words one of the most important legal issues to watch. Prosecutors do not merely have to show that he repeatedly claimed involvement. He definitely did. They have to persuade jurors that those claims, considered alongside the remaining evidence, prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial is therefore as much about the reliability of decades-old admissions as it is about solving one of the most famous unsolved murders in American popular culture. Attorney General Todd Blanche is publicly backing U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro after President Trump criticized her office for dropping a vandalism prosecution involving the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Blanche said he absolutely supports Pirro, the top federal prosecutor in Washington. The comments came after Trump criticized her decision to abandon the prosecution of former Olympian David Hearn and others accused of damaging the reflecting pool. The case grew out of a roughly $15 million renovation project that the administration pushed to complete before July 4th. After an algae bloom appeared and portions of the pool's lining began peeling, Pirro's office brought vandalism charges. Prosecutors later dropped the case after concluding that the damage resulted from problems with the renovation rather than deliberate sabotage. Trump was not happy with that conclusion. He publicly called on Pirro to revisit what he described as her, quote, hastily made decision, and the White House reportedly asked the Justice Department to consider whether additional charges were available. Blanche is now defending the prosecutor's decision. He said it was unfair to judge Pirro based on a single case when her office had made its decision based on the evidence available to prosecutors. The legal principle here is prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutors have substantial authority to decide whether the available evidence justifies bringing or continuing criminal charges, And those decisions are supposed to turn on the law and evidence rather than the political preferences of the president. That principle takes on additional importance because Blanche, who previously served as Trump's personal lawyer, faced questions during his confirmation about whether he could operate the Justice Department independently. There is an important qualification. Blanche also said Trump supports Pirro, despite the president's public criticism of her handling of this case. Still, an attorney general's publicly defending a prosecutor's evidence-based decision against presidential criticism is something of a test of how much independence federal prosecutors will have when their charging decisions conflict with the White House. A federal judge has cleared the way for the Trump administration to end temporary protected status for roughly 1,100 Somalis living in the United States. U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs in Boston lifted a pause she had imposed in March on the Department of Homeland Security's termination of Somalia's TPS designation. The change largely reflects what has happened at the Supreme Court since Burroughs entered that earlier order. Temporary protected status allows people from designated countries experiencing armed conflict, natural disasters, or other extraordinary conditions to remain and work legally in the United States for a limited period. The protection does not itself provide permanent immigration status, and the executive branch periodically decides whether conditions in a particular country continue to justify the designation. The administration maintains that conditions in Somalia have improved enough to end TPS. Opponents point to continuing violence in the country, including fighting involving al-Shabaab militants, as evidence that returning people to Somalia remains dangerous. 4 Somali plaintiffs and advocacy organizations also argued that the administration's decision was motivated by racial discrimination, citing President Trump's previous comments about Somalis. Burroughs rejected that discrimination claim at this stage, although the broader litigation continues. The most important legal development, though, happened above the district court. In June, the Supreme Court allowed the administration to terminate similar protections involving people from Haiti and Syria. Burroughs concluded that the Supreme Court's intervention changed the legal landscape and limited her ability to continue blocking the Somali termination. That illustrates how a Supreme Court ruling can affect considerably more than the people immediately involved in a particular case. Once the court signaled that the executive branch has broad authority to terminate TPS designations, lower courts confronting similar challenges had less room to intervene. For the roughly 1,100 Somalis affected here, that means a temporary immigration protection that allowed them to remain legally in the U.S. can now be withdrawn while the underlying legal fight continues. And with that, and as always, I thank you so much for listening to Minimum Competence, your daily news podcast for lawyers. If you're looking for more than Minimum Competence, links to further reading on all the topics touched on today are in the show notes. And reviews go a long way towards helping new listeners to find our show. If you have a moment, leave a rating or review on your podcast player. We'd sure appreciate it. And if you know someone that might be interested in a story we cover, consider sending them the episode. But remember, nothing here should be construed as legal advice because it is certainly never that. Minimum Competence is available at minimumcomp.com and wherever it is you get your finely crafted podcasts. If you haven't checked out the website in a while, give it a look. There are complete transcripts and resources for each episode and its corresponding segments, as well as an opportunity to receive new episodes in email, newsletter, form. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And until then, remember, let justice be done, though the heavens fall.